Welcome back, China World Report viewers. It's always a great pleasure to host Mr. Lawrence Pih, who is a distinguished scholar on macroeconomics and geopolitics and a frequent speaker to our channel, always giving us some insightful views and some very precise analysis on the many different things that are going on in the world right now. And today's topic will be Venezuela, which is something that's been very much talked about on the news.
Lawrence Pih was born in Shanghai in 1942. He moved to Brazil with his family in 1952, where he made a name for himself in the business world, leading the Moinho Pacifico Group, one of the largest wheat processors in Latin America. He studied philosophy in the United States, specializing in the works of Jean-Paul Sartre. After 50 years in business, he became a renowned expert in geopolitics and macroeconomics, focusing on relations between China and the United States.
So I'd like to start asking you, Mr. Pih, if you could kindly walk us through the interaction between the major multinational oil companies with successive Venezuelan governments and what role they played.
Thank you for the introduction, Italo. We perhaps could go back a little bit in history. The Venezuelan situation today is the result of, I would say, almost a century of events that occurred during the past 100 years in Venezuela. By about 1914, it was the first moment that Venezuela discovered oil reserves, and it became commercially viable by the 1920s. The major oil companies explored and extracted oil from Venezuela. They were mainly American and European companies. So by 1930, the oil reserves in Venezuela that were discovered were huge, and that led Venezuela to be one of the major oil producers in the world. And this continued on into the 1940s and the 1950s. So you see that the whole trajectory of Venezuela oil discovery came around a period of 40 to 50 years. So Venezuela became a major producer of oil in the world. And as a result, the multinational companies and the greater powers in the world saw that as an opportunity, and also the need for oil during the First and Second World War. So the governments of Venezuela has always been governments that are temporary or military dictatorship, or basically even, I would say, semi-democratic governments. And they alternated. There were many coups in Venezuela. So the leaders of Venezuela was Vicente Gomez. He was a dictator from 1908 to 1935. And then was succeeded by Lopez Contreras from 1935 to 1941. Subsequently was substituted by Medina Angarita from 1941 to 1945. And then we had the government of Pérez Jiménez from 1948 to 1958. Subsequently came Rómulo Betancourt from 1959 to 1964, replaced by Raúl Leone from 1964 to 1969. Subsequently, Caldera from 1970 to 73, André Pérez from 1974 to 1979, Herrera Campins from 79 to 1984, André Pérez again from 1989 to 1993, and from then on you have Ramon Velázquez from 1993 to 1994, and then you had a shift in ideology basically, and it was the ascension of Hugo Chavez, a military captain, and he governed the country from 1999 to 2013. And he indicated his heir apparent, the president until a couple of weeks ago, Nicolas Maduro, who ruled the country from 2013 to 2025. And he is now being replaced under American supervision and his vice president, Delcy Rodriguez, has taken over. So we have in 2026 the government that is essentially the continuation of the Bolivarian Revolution, what we call Chavismo, and we have her as the leader of the country under the supervision of the United States of America, because Maduro was kidnapped a couple of weeks ago and shipped off to U.S. on charges of narco-terrorism and other charges that the Americans filed against him. So this is what happened till today. Okay, so it is important also to list the companies that actually participated in the oil exploration and, according to the Venezuelans, exploitation. The major multinational companies were Royal Dutch Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, British Petroleum, Total Energies, Occidental Petroleum, and Eni. Eni is an Italian company. So throughout the decades of exploration, some call exploitation of Venezuelan oil, all these companies had a close relationship with the governments, except for Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. The Venezuelan political system, it's innately corrupt. Corruption is an institution in Venezuela. It's nothing new. And the large multinational oil companies, with the support of their governments, basically the American and perhaps the British also, managed to have influence in the oil policies of the Venezuelan government. So they had very friendly and generous deals, such as very low taxes and very low royalties, which made the exploration of Venezuelan oil extremely profitable for these multinational companies. And obviously, they were very interested in keeping this going. And but most of the wealth of the oil was shipped abroad by these multinational company, and very little actually was very little benefit for the Venezuelan people. And this is why there has always been a grudge against the multinational companies and the government that support them. So this is understandable because a country that has about 303 billion barrels of proven reserve, it is the largest reserve in the world, surpassing Saudi Arabia, which has approximately 267 billion barrels. It is definitely wealth that many, many countries would like to have its hand on. And so during the second wave of nationalization that was executed by the Chavez government, there were some issues of payment. Some companies agreed with the offers made and negotiated, and some didn't. So today, decades later, we still have pending issues. There are companies that were not satisfied at all with the terms that the Chavez government offered, and they're still pending. It is approximately $30 billion that's being disputed right now. And if you look at the Venezuelan oil wealth at the $60 a barrel, it's approximately $18.2 trillion. So the $30 billion is negligible in proportion to the huge wealth, oil wealth of Venezuela. So I don't see that as an issue that the Venezuelan country will not be able to somehow come to an agreement with the pending issues that the U.S. now claims that they've stolen the assets from the oil companies. That is obviously not true. There have been negotiation on negotiation. It's just that there are still pending issues, which is only $30 billion. So this is the whole situation that we find ourselves in now. Today, Venezuela produces very little oil. At the height of production, it was about 3 million barrels a day. Today, it's approximately 700 to 800,000. That's a fraction of what they produced before. The infrastructure is dilapidated, and the maintenance of the refinery of the oil companies, uh, PDVSA, which is the state company, are dilapidated. So they are unable to produce oil at the same level that they used to before. PDVSA was a company created by the Chavez government, and today it has claimed to about 200 billion barrels of oil. The other major foreign countries have claimed. China is the largest. China has a claim of about 6.4 billion barrels, and Russia, I believe, has about 2.3 billion barrels. So these are the two top countries that have claims on Venezuelan oil due to contracts signed with the Venezuelan government. So you see that the state company PDVSA still has huge claim to reserves of the total reserves. And it's a state company run by the government. As a result, they unfortunately were unable to continue to produce at around 3 million barrels and only about 700 to 800 barrels today. So this is the situation that you see the whole picture of how it started and how it is now progressing. It's important to remember that the uh, oil companies had a very close relationship, political, economic, and even pressure from the U.S. government for Venezuela to sign uh, favorable contracts and agreements with the oil companies so that they have huge profits from the exploitation or exploration of Venezuelan oil. And the oil companies, multinational oil companies, have been accused repeatedly of corruption. Corruption goes both ways. You have to have somebody that corrupts and somebody that accepts the corruption. No? So the Venezuelan governments are just as guilty as those that the other part that offered the graft and benefits to the corrupt politicians. And the interesting thing is that the Chavez government, when he assumed power, he nationalized the companies, and the Venezuelan government ran PDVSA. So the benefits no longer went to the foreign companies. And Chavez implemented enormous social programs so that the oil revenues were allocated to the poor people of Venezuela. And this is why he was in power for 14 years. No? There was a coup attempt. It's said that led by the US that failed. So he managed to rule the country for 14 years. However, corruption didn't disappear. It just changed the form of corruption. The Chavez government and any Venezuelan government needs the military for support, otherwise they cannot survive. So Chavez also had the militaries supporting him, but in exchange they were allocated a part of the wealth of the PDVSA. So there were generals running part of the company, and so corruption it changed the form of corruption. The corruption was no longer foreign companies buying up Venezuelan politicians, but the government allowing the corrupt military and others, cronies, to have a part of the pie. So it's fair to say that the Chavez government's corruption in his government decreased significantly, but it never was eliminated. And as things went on, things got worse and worse. And with the Maduro government, it's gotten a lot worse. So corruption until December, or actually January of, December of 2025, under the Maduro rule, uh, Venezuela is in fact a corrupt country, and the government is corrupt. So here we are in 2026, and we will see what happens from here on.
A very, very informative explanation and historical background. I think it's these are points that a lot of people don't consider and definitely not talked about in the mainstream media. Um, and looking at a more broader picture, I'd like to connect that with looking at back at history. When has the United States is constantly involved with regime change, and it's always with the promise of either bringing democracy or bringing down a narco state or terrorist. But if you look back at history, when has externally imposed regime change in Latin America ever worked and produced long-term stability? Is there any example of that?
If you go back in history in the past decades, um, the United States of America has a Monroe Doctrine, which effectively is self allocated power to interfere and intervene in Latin America and even Central America. So, from a historical point of view, it's very interesting. U.S. has interfered in regime change and military covert and overt actions in Guatemala, in Chile, Cuba, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Honduras, Venezuela, of course, Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia. So these are the countries that, one way or another, at some point in
Everywhere.
history, the United States interfered with the internal affairs militarily or otherwise, sabotage, financing opposition, creating chaos, sanctions, etc. So U.S. has a history of intervening in other countries. And there's a book, which I forget the name of the book, but Jeffrey Sachs mentioned, and it's on the U.S. Regime change across the world. And I think there must be dozens of events of U.S. interfering in the domestic issues of the country because they see their interests being at risk, whether it's military, political, or economic. So this is the modus operandi of a great power that has 800 military installations across the globe, has the largest fleet of aircraft carrier, which is a projection of naval power, and extends its reach to other continents. This has been a U.S. Project since the Second World War, and they have been the dominant power for, I would say, since 1945 until very recently, and they still are. The Americans are still a hugely powerful country today, and their global footprint is enormous for since 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. They became the sole superpower. Nobody could even come close to challenging the United States of America. And they used this power to consolidate and to expand their reach. And they did that for about 4 or 5 decades. So the US strategy is very clear. There has been some shift lately. The Trump administration is taking a second look at the cost of being the world policeman. So now it seems that the Trump government is taking a back step to global projection of power and would like to concentrate more in its own backyard, which is the Western Hemisphere. And this is the reason why they are keen on annexing Greenland, having Canada as a vassal, which is already his, but they even want to annex Canada. I wouldn't be surprised if Alberta and Quebec become 51st and 52nd states, and Greenland become the 53rd state. Greenland, we have a problem there, Italo, because Greenland, Trump would like to call it Redland, and the Democrats would like to call it Blueland. So between Greenland, Redland, and Blueland, if the Americans annex Greenland today, the Democrats and Republicans may come to an agreement and call it Purpleland. So we shall see what happens. to the Trump's administration's desire to annex Denmark, which has raised eyebrows in Europe because you have one NATO country invading another NATO country to annex a NATO country. That's kind of weird.
Pretty
But
absurd.
then in the Western politics, this the norm. No? A lot of weird stuff goes on.
And Mr. Pai, you mentioned the Monroe Doctrine, a very important historical notion. Is there a Trump era corollary to the Doctrine?
Yeah, the first corollary was the Roosevelt corollary. It expanded the reach of the Monroe Doctrine. And Trump it's called the Donroe Doctrine, expanded it a little more. But it's not only the Donroe Doctrine, it is also the Donroe-Rubio corollary. And Marco Rubio today is a very powerful person insofar as foreign policy is concerned. He is the Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor. And he being a Cuban refugee, his parents went to Florida and he was raised in Florida. So he has a visceral hatred of communism and the left. You know? And so his policy is in part comes from his gut and not from his brain. So it's understandable that this shift, you know? And the MAGA group also would like to see U.S. be less involved in world issues and concentrate in their own home turf and obviously their own backyard. So what the Americans' vision of the new America is from the Arctic to the Antarctic of the Western Hemisphere. And that's why they need Greenland also. And I would also advise Mexico and Cuba and Colombia to be alert because they are in the crosshair of American foreign policy in the region.
And you mentioned Greenland and how Cuba and Colombia need to be careful. Which do you think are the next targets for the Trump administration? And how successful will they be at acquiring these assets or defeating these targets, I guess?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First, I think is Cuba. The Americans expect Cuba to collapse on the weight of the problems, economic problems they have. The Venezuelan government supplied Cuba with about 100,000 barrels of oil daily, and that is being cut right now. So we do not know how the Cuban economy is going to survive. And so what the Americans, I believe, hope is that with so many problems, economic problems, there will be some sort of internal revolt and the regime will collapse. No, we do not know if the American intelligence has assets in Cuba, but probably do, as they had in Venezuela. And just in a footnote, the abduction of Nicolas Maduro was done also by operatives inside Venezuela with the help of the Venezuelan part of the Venezuelan security apparatus. So it was an inside job also. So despite the efficiency and the remarkable efficiency of the U.S. military, they had a lot of help domestically also inside subversive activity and betrayal of part of the security establishment of Venezuela. So this is Cuba is the first and most imminent country that they want to target. Colombia is also the important target, but Trump has invited Petro to the White House for a meeting, which is surprising. But if I were Petro, I would tread with extreme care. So we don't know what is going to happen in this meeting. I understand that the MAGA group that supports Trump They are not very happy with the invasion and abduction of Maduro. They feel that the U.S. should concentrate more on its own country and less interfering in military actions. And Senate just passed a resolution that will not allow Trump to engage another military action in Venezuela. And this will go to the House. We don't know the result of the House. The Republicans has a very thin margin of thin majority, and we'll see what happens. So everything is pretty much up in the air. We can tell that what the Trump government would like to do, but whether it is possible to execute is another story. And we will see as time goes by which are the next steps. On the other hand, you see a global response. Leaders are meeting all over the world discussing the abduction of Maduro by the American military and the breach of sovereignty of the Venezuelan country. A lot of countries are skeptical. Some are outright protesting outright, but you can see that the global majority, there's a shift of sentiment regarding the U.S., particularly under this Trump's second administration. So we'll see how the geopolitical wind shifts around the world. Even Europeans are not favorable and do not support the abduction of a leader in a sovereign country. So the fact that the U.S. is detaching themselves from Europe militarily, we know that Trump is not very keen on the NATO, and the support that the United States has given NATO lately has decreased significantly. And the Europeans are now forced by the American government to invest 3.5% of their GDP in military hardware and personnel, and another 1.5% in infrastructure, military infrastructure. So that's 5% of GDP. We all know that Europe is a welfare state, basically. So it's a tug of war between the social benefits and military spending. And we shall see how all this plays out in a very complex European scenario where the right is moving very fast to take power. I posit the hypothesis that there could be an alliance between UK and France, UK under Nigel Farage, and France under Jordan Bardella. We see a shift in Germany towards the Alternative für Deutschland. We have a right wing in Italy. So the political and ideological landscape in Europe is shifting, and we will have to see what all this end results. So it's not only Venezuela. This issue of Venezuela has ripple effects across the world.
And the outrage, I think, has been pretty substantial. And the idea behind the abduction of Maduro was that he was being accused of being a narco terrorist. How is that claim being backed up legally and, I guess, explained?
Well, lately, in the last couple of days, the U.S. government has backtracked already. They have virtually admitted there's no such thing as the cartel de las Soles, which Maduro was being accused of being the leader. You can't be a leader of a phantom organization. So they're backtracking. And it is unclear if the U.S. has a case against Maduro. First of all, he's a leader of a sovereign country. You can go on kidnapping people and put them on trial on bogus charges. Maduro can be charged with being a corrupt leader in Venezuela, but that's an internal issue, has nothing to do with the United States of America. He can be accused of stealing the election, which is another domestic issue, has nothing to do with U.S. security. It has to do with U.S. interests, but not security. And along the line of illegitimate leaders, we understand that the United States of America is a democracy. In a democracy, we understand it's the rule of the majority. And Trump was elected his first term with less popular votes than Hillary Clinton. Likewise, George Bush II won against Al Gore with less majority votes. So it's a system that is democratic, pero no mucho. And so if Maduro is illegitimate, many will question, well, what about Mr. Trump and Mr. Bush, during your elections? So it's very, 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 very complex, the issues. In geopolitics, Italo, there's no such thing as right or wrong or moral or ethics. Every country looks to their interest. Some do it militarily, some do it economically, but they all look to their own interest. And militarily is by force. Economic influence is a mutual agreement. And so long as you don't interfere in the internal affairs of another country, I think it's perfectly acceptable using economic stimulus or trade to gain access to natural resources or even some influence in the country. And so looking forward, I think the world is going to go through a period of extreme danger, in my opinion. We have three existential crises. That's a nuclear Armageddon, which a Third World War may lead to that. We have the climate issue, which is very, very serious. A lot of people don't pay much attention to it. I know that the European countries has eliminated the mandatory elimination of internal combustion engines. I think it was by 2028. So that is out the picture. They will continue producing vehicles with internal combustion, which will be using fossil fuel. And the United States of America, of course, has abandoned any effort towards addressing the climate issue. So that's another existential threat for humanity. And the third is in artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence, at the rate it is improving, we will reach what they call artificial general intelligence very soon, at which point that artificial general intelligence will be superior to all human intelligence put together. And the final stage, according to specialists, and I'm not a specialist, is that artificial superintelligence, where basically that artificial intelligence at that level will dwarf our intelligence. And what that will result in is anybody's guess. But certainly we will become, according to the superintelligence entities, we're discardable and useless. So we have some very, very serious challenge to humanity. And we are going about it as if, oh, well, so what? Come
Yeah,
what may.
it's another day.
Countries are not allowed, countries do not cooperate in any form or way. There's a dispute, ideological, political, military dispute. And so we're sleepwalking into possibly the destruction of humanity.
One of the main efforts that actually led to the crisis that culminated in the abduction of Maduro was the use of economic sanctions, which is a tool that the West uses very often against any country that they dislike, any regime that they dislike. At what point do the sanctions stop being a tool of political influence and become more of a collective punishment? And do you think that in the case of Venezuela, that line was crossed years ago, and with all the poverty that all the how the population was, starving for food, things like that? Do you think that became collective punishment instead of just simply a tool of political influence?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. U.S. Has about 1/3 of the world under sanction, some form of sanction. And sanctions is usually economic. Yeah. You do not allow the country to use the banking system, the SWIFT messaging system. They cannot have any access to Western financial institutions. which makes it very difficult for them to trade, make it difficult for them to purchase what they need, like medicine and other things of a prime necessity. And it basically destroys an economy over time. And that's exactly what happened to Venezuela. There were different levels of sanctions imposed. And the latest batch of sanctions imposed on Venezuela actually affected the whole economic system and created a huge humanitarian crisis. It's estimated that 7.1 million Venezuelans left the country to try to survive elsewhere. There's a 2020 study by, I think it's called Lancet. Lancet is an organization, a British organization, which is very, very well respected, and is an excess debt in Venezuela during the years 2017, I believe, and 2018. I'm not sure if that's accurate. That there were about 40,000 to 100,000 excess deaths, which means that the sanctions cause more deaths than you would predict in a normal course of analysis. So what we have is that these sanctions are usually, in the end, the price of sanctions are paid by the population. And rarely do you see a regime change. No? So you can argue, well, that got rid of Maduro, but that wasn't the result of sanctions. He was kidnapped, no? He was abducted. But it doesn't make much difference because the government is still a Chavista government. The party is the same party. The person that is running the country officially, in theory, is Delcy Rodriguez, who was the vice president. And so you didn't have regime change. It's a little bit like what happened in Afghanistan. The Americans wanted to go into Afghanistan to replace Taliban, and they managed to replace Taliban by the Taliban. And they are doing pretty much the same thing. They're replacing the Chavista movement by the Chavista movement. So if you ask me, well, why would they do that? Is to show US power to the rest of Latin America and to make it very clear that US, which has abandoned Latin America for the past 20 years, is back. So if you are looking at the American mantra from Moscow or Beijing, you will say to yourself, well, all great powers have their regions of influence, particularly countries that are close to them geographically. And the Russians will say, well, wait a minute now, we've been invaded by the French, the British, the Japanese, the Americans. By the way, I'm talking about the first invasion, the coalition invasion in 1917 against the Bolshevik Revolution, which was the coalition of coalition of US, France, Japan, UK against Russia to force the Russians to continue to be an ally of the coalition which was fighting against Germany at that time. So the Russians said, well, you people invaded us, Napoleon invaded us, Hitler invaded us. No, come on, no? We would like to protect our borders. No? Can you imagine if somebody invaded the United States of America from Canada, from Mexico, what would happen? No? So the Russians say, well, wait a minute now. You worry about your security. Don't you think I have the right to worry about my security? So,
And this is a point you touched on our interview about the Ukraine war, which, by the way,
yeah,
viewers, was our highest with the highest viewership we've ever had on the channel. So thank you all for watching. And Mr. Lawrence clearly expounded on that interview how the Russia had been invaded many times. So I just wanted to congratulate you, sir, and the channel as well,
thank
because
you.
that was our best interview so far.
Yeah. I'd just like to touch very briefly on China. China sees the U.S. Invasion, actually, of Venezuela and saying to themselves, well, seems to me that it's perfectly okay with the American leadership of invading a sovereign country. So Taiwan is not a sovereign country. It's part of China. So they obviously will have no problem at all if we took Taiwan and reunited to the People's Republic of China. Yeah. I do not think that the Chinese government would take any military action. The Chinese are very patient, and I think they will wait and see how these events develop in Latin America. They are concerned because they are heavily invested in Latin American countries. They are the leading trading partners of almost all Latin American, Central American countries, and they have a lot to lose if they are shut out of the Western Hemisphere. So the Chinese will wait and see how it develops. And meanwhile, they are also very concerned that Mr. Trump has just announced that he wants to raise the military spending from the $900 billion budget for the military to $1.5 billion, sorry, trillion dollars uh, in 2026. That's over 50% increase. So if that should happen, I'm quite certain that the Chinese leadership will feel the need to also increase significantly military spending. So we are again in a military build-up contest. And we have to remember that the Soviet Union collapsed in part because overspending in the military. And if you look at the US economy and its debt, another $600 billion in military spending it's a very high price. And seeing the situation of the US debt, the country debt, the increasing deficit, it would be taxing for the American economy to be able to sustain another $600 billion in military spending. So we'll see what happens here also, and whether this will have any consequences in the credibility of the Treasury, of the US dollar going forward.
What do you foresee that will end up happening with these dramatic events? What will unfold? What will come out of the dramatic events that we saw happening in Venezuela with regards to geopolitics and the world as a whole?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think there's a shift in sentiment of the global majority. They are more skeptical of the Americans today. I think that the Americans have lost some goodwill. No, they've lost a lot of goodwill over the past years. And so this isolationism is welcome, so they won't be interfering. But the way they're doing it and simply invading other countries is something that a lot of countries will probably want to hedge. And it's already occurring. Even the European allies are skeptical, if not deeply concerned, over the way that Americans is conducting their foreign policy. And Europe is in a very, very difficult situation because they have been aligned very closely to the United States of America, just as Japan and South Korea and other countries that are very close allies to the United States of America. They must be asking themselves, well, how reliable is the United States of America? Japan and Korea will be asking, well, do we really think that the Americans will come 8,000 miles to help us? No? In the event of an South Asian incident. So many countries will have to think very carefully the next few steps. And I believe that the whole geopolitical landscape is going to change. And I think that we also need to keep a close eye on the midterm elections in the United States of America this year to see how the political forces are shifting or not shifting. If the Trump administration loses the majority in the House, then it will be more difficult for Trump to push through many of the moves and actions that he has planned. If the Republicans lose the Senate, then we can say that the Trump second half government will be a lame duck government. Now, the immediate problem is that I'm focusing on that will the Supreme Court of the United States rule against the Trump tariffs? That could be quite messy because there'll be many companies filing suits for refund, and it will decrease obviously the revenue for the government, and the fiscal deficit will obviously get much worse. So to make a long story short, very challenging for the United States of America in the next couple of years. Very challenging. And I hope that the desperation does not lead to rash actions by the current leadership.
And I know we're running out of time, sir, but I'd like to get just a couple more questions in. You mentioned both Russia and China, and they were both staunch supporters of Venezuela, politically and even militarily, having provided them with military hardware. What role do you think Russia and China could play? What constructive role they could play in solving the crisis in Venezuela without turning Venezuela into a proxy battleground, as we've seen in other countries in the past?
That's very difficult because they are so far away. And the US military power in the regions is unparalleled. They have total dominance. China does not have military bases anywhere near the United States of America, and Russia likewise. No. So from a military point of view, there's very little they can do. China's import of Venezuelan oil is down to about 500,000 barrels a day. China's total demand for oil is about 14.5 million barrels a day. So Venezuelan oil is a fraction of what China's need. And China imports over 11 million barrels of oil every day. So even from an import point of view, Venezuela's share is just a little bit over 3%. And the Americans has said that they would continue allowing the Chinese to import Venezuelan oil, although they would like most of the oil to go to the United States of America. So, and if the Venezuelans and the Americans come to an agreement that the oil exports to China is still allowed, no, then I think the Chinese will probably say, well, there's not much we can do militarily. And we don't interfere in other countries' internal affairs anyway. So, no. But if our interest is somehow harmed, then we will have to do something about it. I don't believe that the Chinese will do anything. However, the fact that the economic footprint is so large for China in Latin America, and they need a lot of the Latin American natural resources and commodities, then it will be a different story. If the United States of America wants to move into other countries that have very extensive financial, economic, and trade relationship with China, then China will have to do something. But they won't come to the Western Hemisphere militarily. They will use other means of persuasion, like sanctions, etc., and pressure militarily in the Southeast China. So what is sad is that we have come to a conclusion that the modern national institutions such as the United Nations is totally useless in the current world scenario, absolutely useless. Sad because it was hoped many decades ago that United Nations being an institution that all countries respected would be an enormous way to bring about peace and prosperity to the world. And we have seen that it's totally irrelevant today.
Yeah, indeed. So they've
Yeah.
lost a lot of goodwill.
Yeah. If I may, I would like to just
Very well, sir.
touch on the transfer of power from Nicolas Maduro to Delcy Rodriguez. There are three personalities that are very important in today's Venezuelan political structure. They are Jorge Rodriguez, which is Delcy's brother, is a very prominent politician and very influential. He was even the leader of the legislature. And then there's the gentleman called Diosdado Cabello, who is a military, and he is the liaison between governments, the Hugo Chavez government, and the military for a long time. He's a very, very powerful person. And there is the Vladimir Padrino, yeah, Vladimir Padrino, which is defense minister. Now, Diosdado and Padrino are in the US crosshair. So they are potential targets. And the Trump government has made it very clear that if they don't comply to US demands, nasty things will happen to them. We shall see how this plays out. Yeah? How the Delcy Rodriguez government will kowtow to US demands. I think that they will go a certain length, but when it comes to their security, they will put their foot down. A military invasion of Venezuela will be traumatic for the United States of America. Not to mention the fact that right now the Senate has passed a resolution that prohibits more military action in Venezuela. So if the Trump government think that another invasion of Venezuela will be as easy as the first one, I think they're mistaken. I am absolutely sure that the government under Delcy Rodriguez is preparing, and I'm sure that they are trying to root out all the traitors that betrayed Nicolas Maduro. And I'm sure that they are also preparing for a guerrilla warfare if need be. And let me tell you, the Central Americans are very good in guerrilla warfare. They have ample experience. Yeah. So it will not be a walk in the park. It'll be very difficult. And Venezuela is much larger than Vietnam. So be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, let's hope it does not come to that. And just to wrap things up, Mr. Pai, in your view, what would a genuine path to peace or agreement between Venezuela, the Chavista government, and the United States look like that would restore Venezuelan sovereignty without just simply changing who answers to whom?
You have a ideological rupture here. The only kind of government that will bring some sort of benefit to the people would be a socialist government without corruption, like Hugo Chavez attempted to do and failed. As I said, that the institution of corruption is a way of life in Venezuela. I see that no matter which government it is, it makes no difference. Corruption will still be there. So if you have a socialist government that can at least transfer part of the wealth, the huge wealth the country has, to the people and build slowly a middle class, then we can have some hope. But this takes decades. It's not something that you can do overnight. No. While there's oil interest, and by the way, Venezuela doesn't only have oil, they have huge, huge amount of gold reserves also. So Venezuela is cursed by the wealth of its natural resources. And it's a blessing and it's a curse at the same time. So we'll see what happens, but I doubt very much that the Americans will say, okay, we can have a country, a socialist country in our backyard. I don't see that happening. So much so that they want to eliminate the current government of Cuba. So I don't see that happening. So I don't see any possibility near term of a significant progress in Venezuela. I do not see that. It's unfortunate for the Venezuelan people, but this is the way things are. It's a corrupt country. It always has been corrupt, and it will continue to be corrupt.
Yeah, that's another unfortunate point, but I think we do have to be realistic. And I'd just like to thank you so much because I love talking to you, sir, because you're almost like a walking encyclopedia. You are knowledgeable about
Thank
absolutely
you.
every topic, Ukraine, Venezuela, and it's always such a distinct and honest pleasure. And so thank you for coming back on the show. And as always, you have an open invitation. And whenever you have time, please come talk. Please come talk to me and we can talk about whatever's happening next.
Yeah, certainly. I'd just like to say that to me, it's an enormous pleasure to be on your program. And
Thank you, sir.
I accompany your success, and I see that it's almost 100,000 subscribers to your
Yeah,
channel in just
great,
such a short
great.
time. It's in a few months now. So congratulations to you and all your effort.
Thank you, sir.
And most important is that I admire you for the uh, important question that you pose. That I, in my modest way, can somehow try to explain some of it. But these questions are so important. And if the interviewer does not pose intelligent questions, there's very little the interviewee can do. So again, congratulations.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. That means so much to me. And it's again, the pleasure's all mine. And then thank you for coming back on the show. And I'll bug you to come talk to us soon whenever we have some other breaking news or major major
Certainly.
geopolitical occurrences.
I think there will be
Thank
no
you.
shortage of news.
Probably, yeah, yeah, unfortunately.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Lowe.
sir. Have a great day,
Yeah,
and please see you talk. Hopefully, we'll talk soon again.